All right, today we are diving into a really extraordinary and urgent speech that was just delivered at the UN Security Council. Venezuela has made some huge accusations against the United States, and we're going to walk through their argument, point by point, using the words from their official statement to deconstruct the whole thing.
So this speech kicks off with this incredibly powerful line, and right away it sets the tone. This isn't going to be some routine diplomatic update. They're there to declare that a single date, January 3rd, 2026, is a moment of, quote, profound historical gravity. And not just for them, but for the entire world.
So to really get a handle on this, here's how we're going to break it down. We're going to follow the structure of their argument exactly. First, the accusation itself. Then, the legal case they try to build. After that, the motive they're claiming, what they say is at stake for everyone, and finally, what they are actually demanding.
All right, let's start with part one, the accusation. So what exactly does Venezuela claim happened that was so urgent it required an emergency session? Well, they frame it as nothing less than a full-blown attack on their national sovereignty.
So here's the timeline they laid out. On January 3rd, 2026, they claim the United States launched what they call an armed and illegitimate attack inside Venezuelan territory. And we're not talking about a small skirmish here. The speech gets into details about bombardments, the destruction of critical infrastructure, and the loss of life, both civilian and military. But then the claim builds to a climax that is truly shocking, the alleged kidnapping of their constitutional president and the First Lady.
Okay, let's just pause on that for a second. Accusing another country, a UN member state, of kidnapping your head of state? That is about as serious a charge as you can possibly make. This isn't just an attack on a person, it's being presented as an attack on the office of the presidency and the very sovereignty of the nation itself.
So after dropping that bombshell of an accusation, the speech immediately pivots to building its legal case. The big question is, how do they argue that these alleged actions actually violate international law?
And this is where it gets really strategic. They don't just throw around vague terms. They point to a very specific legal framework. They cite UN General Assembly Resolution 3314, which provides the official definition of an act of aggression. Now that's a super smart move, right? By using the UN's own definition, they're trying to lift this out of a he said, she said political fight and plant it firmly in the territory of established international law. They're basically saying, hey, your own rules say this is illegal.
And they don't just stop with that one resolution. They start piling on other alleged violations. They're talking about a breach of the UN Charter, a violation of the principle of sovereign equality, a disregard for the Geneva Conventions, international human rights law, you name it, they're arguing it was broken.
But they keep coming back to this one crucial point, the immunity of a head of state. And they're very clear that this isn't some personal perk for the president. No, they frame it as a fundamental rule that protects the sovereignty of every nation. Their argument is pretty stark. If a head of state can be kidnapped, you haven't just attacked one country. You've created an incredibly dangerous precedent for literally everyone else in the room.
So we've covered the what, the attack, and the how, the alleged violation of international law. That brings us to the next logical question, and the one the speech spends a good deal of time on. Why? What motive are they pointing to for all of this?
Well, according to them, it all comes down to their natural resources and their strategic location. The speech is very direct here. It points to the country's oil, its energy sector, other strategic materials, and its key position on the map. They argue these things have always made them a target for what they call external greed and pressure.
And the way they frame this is so important to their whole argument. They're saying this isn't just some 21st century political disagreement. They're painting it as something much older, a return to a darker pattern, a throwback to the worst practices of colonialism, a time when powerful countries just took what they wanted by force.
And by framing it that way, they're trying to make it everyone's problem. The question they're essentially asking the rest of the world is, why should you care? If you're not Venezuela, why is what happened to us a threat to you?
And that leads us right into the fourth part of their argument, the global stakes. Their message becomes crystal clear here. This isn't just about Venezuela anymore. This is about the very rules of the game for the entire international system.
So what they do is they lay out two very different paths for the world. On one hand, you have the world the UN was supposed to create, right? A system based on law, diplomacy, and working together. But on the other hand, they warn of this other path that this action creates. A world where might makes right, where the strongest countries can just do whatever they want, whenever they want.
And this quote from the speech really just sums it all up. They're saying, look, if you let this slide, if you just relativize it, the message you're sending to every other country is that international law is just,
optional. That what really matters in the end is how powerful your army is. A truly devastating thought.
Okay, so they've made their accusation, laid out the legal case, explained the motive, and warned of the global consequences. So how do they wrap it all up? Well, they finish with a direct appeal, a list of specific demands for the UN Security Council. They ask for 4 very clear things. Number 1, demand the immediate and safe return of the President and First Lady. Number 2, condemn this use of force, no ifs, ands, or buts, unequivocally. 3, reaffirm that core UN principle that you cannot acquire territory or resources by force. And finally, number 4, adopt concrete measures to de-escalate the crisis and protect civilians.
Now, it's really interesting that right in the middle of all this, the representative made a point to project stability. They told the council, hey, our institutions are functioning, the constitutional order is preserved, and we maintain complete control of our territory. They even mentioned that the executive vice president was being sworn in to ensure continuity. The message was clear: we have not collapsed.
And so that leaves us with this huge, difficult question that just hangs over the entire speech. The whole point of the UN Security Council is to keep the peace. But what happens when one of its most powerful members, a permanent member with a veto designed to be a guarantor of that peace, is the one being accused? How is the system supposed to work then? It's a question that strikes right at the heart of the United Nations power and its very purpose.